Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. The finishing work's all done on this guitar now, and it is time to get some electronics put in here. So today we're going to do our final assembly. If you haven't seen the start of this series, check it out. I'll put a card here for you to click on. You can watch the entire series. We're almost at the end now, and I think it looks great. We've come a long way. So in this video, we're going to be putting in the electronics that came with the kit, all of the hardware and stuff that came with it. We're going to test all of that out. I know it's going to be pretty good because I've seen them before, but that's what we're doing for this one. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned though, because we are going to get our hands on some upgrade hardware, and we're going to put all that in and do this all again when that happens. Before I go ahead and dump the electronics into this thing, I'm going to do my shielding work. If you haven't already seen one of my videos on how to do that, I explain how it's done, why it works, etc., kind of in more detail and at length. So I recommend you check one of those out. There was one in my last series, but how to deal with noise issues or reduce hum in your guitar. That's what those videos cover, is the shielding. I'm just going to do it really quick in this one. The basics of it are I'm going to apply copper shielding tape and connect them using the soldering iron, connect all the cavities that are shielded so that we get essentially as close to a Faraday cage as we can to avoid any hum issues. Not a big deal in this guitar because it's got humbuckers, so it's not going to be a lot of buzz, but you know, better safe than sorry. And one other thing to note, I really love the top of this guitar, so I'm not going to be using the pickup rings on this thing. You guys have probably noticed I really don't use them very often. I'm just going to direct mount my pickups into there if I can, and then we won't have to worry about that, and we'll be able to see as much of this top as possible. So with all of that in mind, let's get started. So we start with the copper shielding process here, and like I said, I have videos that have more detail on how to go about this, but the gist of it is you're covering pretty much every aspect of the cavities with this copper tape and making it so that you have that conductive shield around your cavities, around your pickups, and that essentially prevents noise and hum and electrical interference that causes the noise and hum. I just stick it in there with my hands essentially, and then I use a tool, for me generally the back of a chisel, to make sure that it's all in there nice and tight and burnish it down a little bit. And then occasionally I will poke little holes essentially through one piece of tape into the other to make sure that there's contact between them. If you really want to go hard at it, so to speak, you can actually solder the pieces of tape together as well. And if you're not too worried, which is probably pretty reasonable with these humbuckers, for example, you don't have to do any of that. You can just lay the tape on top of itself. In fact, technically, you don't necessarily need the tape. Another option for shielding is using conductive paint. Personally, I don't like that as much, but it is a fairly common way of going about it, so consider that as well when you're making your decision about how to go about doing this. You'll see when I do these cavities that for this one in particular that I'm working on here, I end up overlapping the tape over the top a bit. You do that and then put some copper tape on the back of your cavity covers as well, and that kind of completes that shield and ensures that no electrical interference can enter from essentially any direction. Now it's time to put in the hardware, so I'm starting with the posts for the stop tail and for the bridge. I just kind of push them in a little bit with my thumb. You don't have to get them very far. I'm actually kind of overdoing it a little bit here. Not that it makes any difference. There's nothing wrong with pushing them in with your thumb. But then all you have to do is go in with a piece of wood after, like I'm doing here. Tap gently with a hammer, and you can get them in there nice and flush. Be careful when you're doing that. Obviously, you don't want to mangle the top of your finish, but you can tap them in there until they're comfortably seated. Now I'm putting the switch in just kind of to see how it looks with or without the stupid cover plate thing that says treble and rhythm on it. I end up not using that plate. I don't like the cover, something like this top. It seems kind of wasteful to me. So I don't use that. I end up pulling that switch back out to wire it. Here I am putting the pots in. This whole wiring harness comes essentially pre-done, so there's really not much to do on it and not much to know. You essentially just have to put them all in the right place, which is quite straightforward. You will see me tightening them on there with a socket there, just a standard socket. StewMac does sell their own version of that. which is essentially the same thing but more expensive. So if you decide that you can only really trust the StewMac version, then there is also a bridge in New York that I would love to sell you. For the next part here, I'm just putting the wires through from the cavity. They go all the way from the main control cavity through both pickup cavities and into the toggle switch cavity. So now I've pulled that toggle switch back out, taped around that hole from the back so that I've protected the surface of the wood, and I'm just soldering that together. Again, very straightforward. I'm using the Weller soldering iron that I will have shown you guys in a previous video. Still very fond of that choice, so if you're looking for a soldering iron, check out the Amazon link in the description. You'll find it in there, along with some of my other favorite stuff, including most of the finishing products that I used on this guitar. I'm direct mounting the pickups like I told you, so I am now putting some foam underneath. You can do it that way, or you can use springs, but you need something with a little spring underneath the pickups so that when you loosen, they actually raise up, so you have some ability to adjust the height of them. You may also find that you need some fairly small screws, so keep that in mind. Sometimes your standard screws won't quite work. You're going to need something a little smaller. I'm just screwing in the posts now for the stop tail and the bridge, and I can simply pop those into place essentially once these are screwed in. I get them in there so that when I flip the guitar over here again, it's got something to rest on. It's now resting on those posts, which is, in my opinion, a little better than it resting directly on the face of the guitar. Here I am soldering the pots. There's not much to this either. It's just really a couple of them. You feed the wire through the lug and solder it in place. If you've got a decent soldering iron, it only takes a few seconds to do that. And the wiring harness that's already in place here makes this actually quite easy to do. The kit does come with a diagram, and of course you're welcome to look up your own, but I am just following the one that comes with it for now, keeping it very simple, and I'm going to see how this thing performs just using the hardware and wiring that it basically comes with. Chances are most of you know just as much about wiring as I do anyway, so there's not much else that I can tell you about that. Make sure you check what the tip and ground are for your output jack, and as for the rest of it, it should be pretty much just straight off the diagram. I also won't necessarily recommend using a drill to install that stuff like you saw me doing just then. Once we have the bridge and stop tail popped into place here, which only takes a couple of seconds, it's time to move on to our headstock. We're going to get the truss rod cover installed and then the tuning pegs. The truss rod cover has the holes in it, so I'm using it as a template along with a very small drill bit to put some pilot holes into the face of the headstock here, so that I don't have to worry about tear out or having to push too hard or creating any kind of cracks or any of that nonsense. Pilot holes are almost never a bad thing, so it's usually worthwhile to drill them beforehand. You can also use pilot holes on the tuning pegs to install the little screws that keep them from twisting. I am not putting those screws in right now. I'm just installing these kind of without them, and I'm going to tighten them down a little bit. The reason for that is I intend to change these tuning pegs when I go through and do our upgrade video. So I don't want to have a bunch of screw holes that might not necessarily be in the same place when it comes time to do that. It's not a big deal as it stands. I'm just tightening them down with a ratchet. Once again, this is a normal ratchet, not a StewMac ratchet. And I'm just going to tighten them down to the point that they're not going to twist on me anyway. Essentially, worst case, it leaves a little bit of an indent in the face of the headstock, which isn't a big deal because the new ones will probably cover that anyway. And there we have it, fully assembled, just needing some strings and a little bit of a setup. I think that looks pretty awesome. I'm quite happy with how it turned out, and I hope that you guys are as well. In the next episode, I'm going to test this thing out. We'll see how it sounds in the hands of somebody who is miles from being a master, aka me, and perhaps at a later date, probably after the upgrades, we'll get somebody in who can actually play and get a demo from them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this series, this build. I hope you stick around for the final video, and don't forget to subscribe so you can see the next projects that I have coming up after this. We've got several more guitar kits in the works. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.